Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I keep saying good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm David Burton-Sampson MP for Southend West and Leigh, the very first Labour MP ever for Southend West and Leigh. I just thought I'll drop that one in there. So thank you. We're competing with the Chancellor's speech. So thank you all for coming along to this, what's hopefully going to be a very interesting session on open banking to open energy, unlocking the data economy, and it's an SME4Labour event today sponsored by Open Banking Limited. You'll have to bear with us. Two of our panellists are on their way from another event. They will be joining us very shortly, so they'll be with us, but I will do the introductions to them in a moment. So, open banking arrived in the UK in 2018, enabling customers to share their current account data with third-party fintech firms and aimed at boosting competition. So what is it? In a nutshell, it's data sharing so that one bank can share your details with a third party. As of 2023, there are more than 7 million users, although that's somewhat short of what the industry had hoped for. But despite that, we're still leading in terms of take-up across Europe, just about. In order to remain relevant to the financial services environment, open banking needs to keep evolving to reflect the rapid changes in markets and payment technology. The Labour government wants to grow this too, and we've shown that we want to drive forward the smart data and open banking agenda with the Digital Information and Smart Data Bill, and that being part of the King's Speech. In future, a wide range of sectors could benefit from a future created by open banking, including our energy market. And as if by perfect timing, we now have our full panel here, so we can do introductions to them. So, let me introduce our panel to you. Firstly, just here to my right, we have Henk van Hoel, who is the CEO of Open Banking Limited. Henk was appointed CEO of Open Banking Limited in January 2022 to implement an effective and appropriate governance and management framework for the organisation and to manage the delivery of the CMA roadmap and the operations of OBL. Next to Henk, we have Councillor Jeff Barraclough. He's the Cabinet Member for Planning and Economic Development at Westminster City Council. Jeff was first elected as Councillor for Maida Vale Ward in 2018. He works in financial technology and advises start-up businesses. He previously worked as Head of Propositions at EVO Payments International, Vice President of Corporate Marketing and Propositions at WorldPay, and Director of Strategy at Markets and Propositions at BT Expedite and BT Freshca. Next to Jeff, we have Gavin Starks, who's the founder and CEO of Icebreaker One. Gavin has founded and led over a dozen organisations, including as founder and CEO of the Open Data Institute, co-chair of Open Banking Standards, and CEO of global environmental intelligence company AMEE. Next to Gavin, we have Elena Perez-Solis. Elena is the Head of Policy and Public Affairs at B4NZ, which is Business for Net Zero. She leads B4NZ's approach to policy and regulation and the delivery of its public affairs strategy. And last but by no means least, we have Sheldon Mills, who's an Executive Director at the Financial Conduct Authority. Sheldon has been serving in this role since 2020. Prior to this, he held the position of Director of Competitions. So I'm now going to invite each panellist, starting with our sponsor, Henk, to give a 2-minute opening address. So Henk, over to you.
Thank you for this forum, and thank you everybody for arriving on time. Like me, so I was in the wrong room. There are 2 rooms 7, so 7 could be very lucky. Thank you also for the panel to be here today. I think open banking has reached quite a critical milestone as well. Last week in particular, when we announced the completion of the roadmap. But let me just go back a little bit to open banking and where it all began. So with the remedy with the CMA, so we're an industry which is actually only 6.5 years young. I think there's a lot to come in our industry, not only in data but also in payments going forward. It is a British invention, and we should be proud about that. And we should be very commendable also to the regulators, because that's actually through the remedy that it's a regulatory invention. And this has been copied now in 60 countries in the world. And about 48 of these countries copying us have a centralized approach as well. And we can come to that later in terms of perhaps the success factors of why open banking works abroad as well. So it's quite a success, and also looking at today's success, we announced 11 million users, growing quite quickly, also 20 million in payments each month now. 1 in 5 SMEs are using open banking, and 1 in 7 consumers are using open banking. We think the industry is worth about 4 billion, and about 4,000 or 5,000 people work in this sector. It's a very critical point because we're moving beyond open banking, and that's what we're all here for and what we're all interested in, because we want to unleash some value in the industry, and we think it's about over 30 billion that could be unleashed when you go into other smart data schemes going forward. So beyond open banking, talking open finance, talking open energy and open others, open property and open payments as well going forward. So very promising, and the reason we're also here today is also because of a reminder that unfortunately there was a bill that doesn't cut the wash up at the end of the former government, so the new government in place now, looking forward really with the government as well to make sure that the digital information and smart data bill comes through as quickly as possible, so that gives powers to regulators and the government as well, then to potentially mandate or at least compel some of the participants to share data going forward, beyond, of course, only open banking, because the regulatory framework needs to be in place, of course, as well for open banking, so that we can continue the order which actually sparked off open banking in the country as well. So in a nutshell, thank you, and hopefully it will be very engaging, interesting, and I'll hand over back to you.
Thank you very much. I'll now hand over to Jeff if you'd like to give your 2 minutes intro.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for coming. It's great to see so many people excited by this topic, and I was delighted to see open banking get a shout out in the Labour Party manifesto as a demonstration of our commitment to financial services and innovation. It is a very important subject, but not, I think, for the reasons that have been outlined so far. I'll come to that in a second. It's growing way slower than was expected, and is right now, I think, possibly in the trough of disillusionment, if you take the Gartner model of innovation. Why is that? It's because it does not have full support from the banks, and as a way of getting money from one bank account to another, you require full support of the banks to maintain the quality of their APIs and their innovation roadmap, and leaves merchants to some extent hostage to the customer experience provided by the banks of the shopper. It needs an acceptance mark. Just as you go to a point of sale terminal and you see the 3 little bars, no, you can pay with contactless, you need an acceptance mark for open banking or a brand, because at the moment it's chaos at the checkout page. It needs scheme rules, just like you do with a card payment, to enforce standards for refunds, for authorization codes and so on. Otherwise it's really hard for merchants to use. And with that must come consumer protection. So when you book a flight with a credit card and the airline goes bust, you get your money back. You won't get that with open banking, and that needs to happen. And most importantly, a business model so that everybody in the value chain can get paid to ensure they can innovate and provide these services that we need. At the moment, we don't know what that business model is. And that requires, I suspect, government intervention. The pro-competitive regulation regime has got us so far, but I don't think will get us where we need to go. The alternative to government regulation is that Visa and MasterCard will do it for us, and they'll provide a good service. But the reason why I think open banking is important is because it gives Britain strategic autonomy in payments. And in an uncertain world, having your electronic payment system run by American multinationals at a time when Trump too could look at Britain and decide they don't like what we're doing and enforce restrictions on our payment systems through Visa and MasterCard. Unlikely, but it's a risk. we need to be able to manage our own merchant and person-to-person payments in the UK. The EU gets that. That's why they're promoting the European Payment Initiative as a wallet-based system based on SEPA Instant. That's why the ECB is promoting the digital euro, again, for strategic autonomy. So I think it's important, but I think the reason is not to reduce friction in the payment system. It's to allow the UK to stand on its own 2 feet if we have to.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Gavin, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Really delighted to see so many faces, given we're in competition with another quite high-profile speaker. The opportunity ahead of us is really quite phenomenal, and I take on board some of the challenges along the way. But from my perspective, in originally co-chairing the development of open banking, and I now also co-chair the Smart Data Council, helping the non-government actors there express the needs of industry and the needs of citizens back into that developing framework. We're at a very exciting moment in UK's history. As someone who's been working on data for, I'm not going to say how many decades, but many decades, seeing the regulator, seeing the primary legislation moving now is incredibly encouraging. We're seeing secondary legislation in development, and we're seeing regulators moving. So I want to take, again, a bit of a step back as to why is this important? Well, ultimately we're creating data portability for every citizen and every business in the country. And we're giving the rights to those individuals and to those legal entities to have better control over how they can use their information. Now that gives us not just a good degree of political economy from other territories, but it puts the rights back in the hands of the user. Right? And so the way that we need to now move forwards to make sure that this can land and land well is to focus in on impact and the use cases and the value cases for businesses and the value cases for us as individuals. We're in no doubt that there is a huge amount of value to be unlocked, and we'll touch on some of those as we go through today. But it really does require us all to lean into this agenda in the way that we maybe haven't lent in before. This needs to be a board level responsibility. If you don't have a chief data officer in your organization, you should do. And as we look at the economic impact of this, we will start to see a process, let's say, of creative destruction. Some business models will go away. We saw that in the creation of open banking, but new business models will come forward. And again, I want to encourage everyone here to talk about tangible use cases that deliver value to the consumer or value to businesses here. With open energy, which we've been developing under Icebreaker One, which is a non-profit, over the last 3-4 years, we're seeing many of the sort of challenges of how do these kinds of smart data frameworks translate from the financial economy into the real economy. We'll touch on that more during today. But the key takeaway for the audience today is this is in flight. The regulators, including Ofgem, are moving in this direction, and we're setting precedents for how this will work across the whole of the economy. So if you don't think it's relevant to your business, it will be relevant to your business in a relevant time frame, 12 to 18 months from now.
Thank you very much, Gavin. Elena, 2 minutes from you, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. So I will bring the perspective from Bankers for Net Zero. We do a lot of work as well on how to use the principles of open banking to unlock finance towards net zero, and we work a lot with our banks, and many of the challenges that they mentioned is the lack of data from their SMEs in their portfolios, in their bank loan books, or also other companies, the SMEs in their supply chains. They currently don't have the data that they need to unlock the finance that is needed, because you cannot finance what you cannot measure. So we've been doing a lot of work on this area, because open banking essentially is one source of data, but sustainability is a lot more complicated. So we try to think about how open data and the ecosystem that will help this data flow and feed into the real economy. And at the moment, SMEs are facing a lot of difficulties to access green finance due to the lack of standardized greenhouse gas emissions reduce frameworks. So there are also a lot of carbon calculators, a lot of accounting platforms that's creating a lot of confusion in the marketplace. It's increasing the costs and the validation and the risk. So what we are trying to think about is how we can, using the principles of open banking, creating a data framework ecosystem that allows data to flow from the SMEs or just to feed into the real economy. So that's something that I will touch upon later during the discussion, and something that we can't speak about today.
Thank you, Elena. And over to the regulator, Sheldon.
Great, thank you. And thank you for setting up this meeting. I've worked on open banking, and with Gavin actually, worked on thinking through open finance for a number of years, so since about 2021, when I was just the Director of Competition at the FCA. I still have the same belief in a data economy that I did then through that work that I did do now, but I'm a bit wiser and certainly greyer now, as it's difficult actually to turn those beliefs into action and into systems which people adopt as consumers, as businesses, and which government supports. I think I agree with Gavin that we are at a really excellent point here in the UK. We can do ourselves down, but I was in Brazil recently at a conference, and every single regulator in the Latin American region was there because UK business and expertise was there, and the regulator was there because they believed that we are still ahead in terms of this. I mean, I have different views on whether we're ahead or not, but we are in terms of the number of users using open banking. We are in terms of the API calls, so the machinery and how that works and the quality of that, and we can still continue to be ahead, I think, if we get a few things. One is legislation which backs the formation of open data schemes across the economy, both within finance but in energy and lots of other sectors. The other, not mentioned so far, is really a national strategy in relation to digital identity. You can't really have a data economy if you can't really prove who you are easily and simply. So it quite seems to make sense that digital ID is something that needs to move forward in some form. And I know Charlotte's here from CFIT, who will be and Ez, and who will be working on elements of that for SMEs. But we do need to really crack digital ID. I think that's an important underpinning. And then I think it's I'm agnostic at the moment on who does it, in terms of whether it is Visa or MasterCard, or whether it is, at the moment I'd be just happy if somebody picks it up and runs with it, if I'm perfectly honest. But I do think that whoever is going to pick this up and run with it, and at the moment it is with us as regulators and with Henk, we've got to get the commercials right. So there's got to be a sense that people can defray their costs, that people feel it's fair and equitable, and there are commercial solutions that underpin this. Otherwise, it won't really move forward anywhere. And that's why we're working through the Joint Regulatory Operating Committee, which I co-chair, which is seeking to design a future entity for open banking with Henk and others' help, but also working on variable recurring payments, but also premium data APIs, so we can try and actually work through what does a commercial mechanism look like. And that's just in banking. If you ask me where my ambition is, I really do think people won't ask what's the success in open banking. They'll be saying, look at the success across many aspects of the economy and how all of these things are joined up with data at its heart. And payment vehicles being a sort of baseline, almost like a pipe, allowing us all to benefit from this. But it's a journey.
Thank you, Sheldon. So we're going to continue now. I'm going to pose some questions to some of our panellists, and then towards the end of the debate, you'll have a chance to put your questions to the panellists as well. So I'm going to start with you, Henk, as CEO of Open Banking Limited. So what would you say are the lessons from the rollout of open banking that we can apply to maybe future smart data schemes?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. I think I like cooking, and I thought about your question, so I'm going to think about what worked and looking at other countries as well. And I think have the best chef or a good chef, have a great recipe and amazing ingredients. And let me just very quickly touch on those. So a great chef, I think we decided very early on, particularly with Gavin, that it would be a very centralized approach. It would be driven from the center, and it would also be mandated from the outset. Now, I'm not saying we need to do that or replicate that in the future. However, this worked in this formula. So the chef, there was actually one chef, there was one central one. And if you look at different countries, actually 48 out of the 60 countries are through the central banks, like in Brazil as well. The recipe was very focused on one or a couple of key successes. So benefits for end users, being SMEs and consumers. So it was really in banking. So it was really one use case, very well focused on, because if not, like other countries went very wide as well, and then they had to regroup. And we went reasonably wide, but also deep in that as well with our read-write APIs. So that's the recipe, and that's the chef. Now the ingredients. I think the first ingredient was standardization, of course. I think it's a bit like electronic vehicles. You can't have each brand have their own plug. You need to agree on standards. And that will accelerate the innovation and competition on the back of that. So standardization was key, rule number one, also maintaining these standards. And that's what we're doing also now with the OBL, maintaining standards. We're now at version 4 as well, so that we have the latest security protocols, etc. And make it also sure that we're interoperable with other data sharing schemes going forward as well, which we're going to touch on later on too. So maintenance of the standards. Trust. This is a digitally native environment so far. We're not always in the shops yet for payments, but we need to create trust. There is nothing in the virtual space. So we now are a vibrant platform with 94 banks, 250 fintechs or TPPs, and it's a trusted environment. We call it the trust framework with trusted services as well, so that I have the right onboarding, the right certification, and also the latest certification as well. Another element was monitoring to ensure that all participants behave, that there are no rogue players, so that impacts again the trust framework as well. So monitoring is quite key in this, so that people are complying and that participants do the right thing, produce the right things at the right time, etc. And finally, it's all about education as well, because this is quite new, and promotion, so making these standards publicly available, but also engaging with other industries is very helpful too, so that was helpful too. So these are the 4 ingredients, I think. And perhaps, yes, there was a 5th one we didn't work on right now, because it's the commercial framework and the legal frameworks which we take on board, and I would add that onto it as additional key ingredients for success.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Henk. All that talk of ingredients is getting close to lunchtime, making me a little bit hungry. Let's move to Jeff. So Jeff, just thinking about the whole trust element, how can we build confidence amongst consumers and attract more consumers to feel comfortable using the open banking platform?
The first thing we need is we need a consistent brand and a name for this thing, and a brand mark, just as we have with other payment mechanisms and so on. So if you're a NatWest merchant and you say I want to accept open banking payments, they brand your checkout Pay It. If you're with Barclays, they call it Pay by Bank app. So the other people who are trying to do this thing with their own brand and make a business out of it. So from the consumer perspective, they need to know, if I hit this button, what I'm going to get, and this is how it's going to work, and these are the rules, and this, if it goes wrong, this is what happens. We haven't yet seen open banking tested by the fraudsters. The fraudsters are still very much looking at other methods of account push payment and credit card fraud. When they get round to this, we'll see what happens. If the regulations change, as we expect, and banks are going to be made liable for all account push payment fraud, then fraudsters are going to know, hey, this is a great target, because I can try and trick all consumers to pay me money, and then I can do that in confidence, because they're going to get reimbursed. They're not going to really pay a lot of attention to things. So I think we have to think about how this works in totality. The digital ID point is part of that. When it was first mooted, I think by the previous Labour government, I don't want ID cards. I think that's a really bad idea. It impinges upon my my sense of self as a British person, it's not what we do. My views have changed. I think our lives are now pretty much entirely digital, and trying to prove who we are all the time is a complete pain. Let's have a single, not need a card, but a number, a thing that sits on our phone or our app that can prove who we are, guaranteed by the government. And I think that would be a good way forward and allow us to do many of this stuff much more safely.
Interesting. Thanks very much, Jeff. Jumping over to you, Sheldon. Finance and energy are sectors that have experienced a real relative lack of consumer choice. So the cost of borrowing and energy bills have been a key driver of the cost of living challenges, as we know. So how do you see the role of government and the regulator in the advancement towards open finance and open energy playing out? And how can the regulator strike a balance between innovation, competition, but most importantly, consumer protection?
Yeah, well, I think there is choice in those markets. I might disagree slightly with the question. I think there are lots of businesses out there. You go to lots of different experts or savings markets, etc., and you can see choice, and there is ability to switch. Where both open finance and open energy can improve upon that in many ways is to get greater access to data with consent, and then get much more into meeting the needs of consumer through the use of data. And obviously that is going to be elevated now if we get to grips with AI and other forms of technology advancements. So the possibility of acceleration for that is there. It is important, though, as we go on this journey, that we think about the consumer protections through that. Not just the data protections and how that is protected, the ethical use of that data, how it's shared or used, etc. There are laws in place, but they need to be modernised. But then in addition to that, it was mentioned already, when you pay for something with a credit card, you might have certain protections. How do you get that type of thing within these systems? So I think it is going to be important, and we have, as part of our JROC work programme, I think there's about, I don't know, you'll know, Henk, the precise number in the roadmap, but I think there's about 20 or 30 projects typical of a regulator to have that many. But one of them is around dispute resolution and consumer protection elements. So we're keen to try and get the right sort of frameworks in that, which might be helpful. I'm sure Gavin through Open Energy has thought about this as well. And then in terms of a regulator, how we balance, well, I'll leave it to the audience to tell me. I'm sure many in the audience would probably say not well, and then I would say well, so we could have that wonderful debate before lunch, and I'd probably get hangry. But what I would point to, certainly as us in the UK, is that our sandboxes, our digital sandbox and others, have been a place where open banking infused applications for provision to people. I'll mention one company, Salad Days, which uses open banking in order to think about and get access to people's credit information, as opposed to using the credit reference agencies. And then it can actually meet the needs of more vulnerable consumers who might not get good access to credit. And we've worked with different companies through our sandbox to ensure that they're compliant. So we try to balance it by maintaining our high standards whilst allowing people to come and play in the sandbox and innovate.
Amazing, thank you. Gavin, for you, so are there any sector-specific challenges for energy compared to the financial services, and how can we mitigate them?
So it's a great question, and I think I'll touch on a few points here. One is Henk's recipe. I think we could look nationally and internationally as to what's worked. And in every country where it's working the best, the regulator's involved. And I cannot overstress that. There is such an importance to the government and regulators being involved in this process, because if it's left up to just the commercial market, we end up with what I would call a critical mess. And we have a potential here for a critical mass to bring people together and get the data rights correct, get the liability transfer right, get the modes of redress right, and so on. Now we have to somehow create cohesion between our financial economy trust frameworks and our real economy trust frameworks. So lessons learned from the front line of open energy. First of all, when we started, the energy sector maybe quite predictably said, we're different from banks. But when you actually work through a lot of this, you go, it's just data. It might be coming from a different source, it has a different purpose, has a different application, but when you actually walk through this on the use cases, you find very similar design patterns, whether that's B2C or whether it's B2B. And the B2B bit here is of particular interest that I want to touch on. One of our flagship programs, which has been mentioned already, around carbon reporting, the banks have a mandatory compliance.
Excuse me, sorry.
Banks have mandatory compliance around carbon reporting against every loan that they issue, which means they now have to footprint every single SME of basically all of their customers in the country. So we're running a program to automate that process using smart meter data, so your electricity smart meter, can go through to the carbon accounting applications, of which there are about 270 carbon reporting tools in the UK, and from there into the bank, so they can de-risk their green lending. And they can also measure, once they've issued a green loan, they can measure the impact of that loan. Now that's in development right now. We're taking it into pilot at the end of this year. But to get there, we've got 15 trade associations on the steering group, including UK Finance, the British Business Bank, DESNES, and so on. And there's about 40 commercial partners, including Lloyds, Barclays, Sage, and so on. It's an incredibly complex ecosystem. The key underpinning that, though, is what are the design patterns that enable us to scale data sharing between the real economy and the financial economy? How do we protect the data rights? Of the 5.5 million SMEs in the UK, there's about 4 million that are sole traders. So they already fall under GDPR, so that's a nice mess to unpick. There's at least 5 different ways of interpreting energy data regulation in the UK at the moment. So trying to harmonise that very complex landscape so you can get that data to flow through to the lenders who have a mandatory requirement to lend money for green financing. The capital will get deployed. We need to maximise the validity of that green lending, so it's actually delivering the impact that we need to see against our national net zero targets. So it's a good exemplar of the complexity of the challenge, but it also demonstrates to us that it is possible. It is possible to get together these very complex data value chains, look at common liability statements, look at the multilateral contracts that need to exist, and express them through what's called a scheme. And the scheme is the thing that can then get implemented within a trust framework. Now, I want to paint a picture here. It is complex. There's probably about 200 people working on just that one scheme right now. But once we've got the rails in place for that, we'll be able to switch it on for water, for gas, and for other things that are at least addressable in a digital context. And we're very keen with my Smart Data Council hat on to see how that plays out, because we're hitting lots of difficult questions along the way. But the potential is to unlock billions for UK SMEs with a single click. So if we're looking at what's the point of all of this, we want to make it easier for UK businesses to deal with an incredibly labyrinthine landscape of carbon reporting and get access to capital to help us on that journey.
Fantastic, thanks. And that's actually the perfect link to you, Elena. So obviously one of the main drivers of open banking is to deliver for public good. So what will the effect of open finance and open energy on consumers, SMEs, and even larger businesses be? And how will open energy move us closer to our net zero goals?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's just what Gavin just said around unlocking billions into the real economy, and we work very closely with them on the project that he just spoke about, Perseus, because as SMEs are a very important piece of the net zero journey, and there should be more focus on them in order to get where we want to be. And we've seen latest research that has shown that in the UK alone, there's over 280 carbon accounting platforms, and they are all operating slightly different methodologies, different approaches, and different calculation methodologies. And what's happening with that is that's just creating a lot of confusion and in the marketplace around what's good and what's bad, and that's just leading to a lack of trust, which is perpetuating this cycle of increased validation, increased risks, increased costs. And currently, ESG data is just not flowing in the market between banks, asset managers, and the customers and clients. And this is just hampering investment decisions towards net zero. So what we need to focus on is just, as Gavin said, just developing functioning data ecosystems using open standards to allow this data to flow. And we are massive champions of Perseus in paving the way and selling the governance frameworks for effective permission of sharing of data. But what we are really focused on is identifying the data points that can be shared consistently across SMEs, and what is the minimum standard that SMEs should adhere to. So that ultimately connects into Perseus, that everything should have ultimately the ability to be shared through automated live data sources. So what we would like to see is just a roadmap to get effective live sharing and permissioning of data across the SME market. And also these principles of open banking and open energy could be applied into other policies, like for example, as at Bankers for Net Zero, one of our key policy priorities is to reform EPC ratings, energy performance certificates. And there are obviously like a lot of issues that we've been mentioning today about the sharing of data around GDPR. So what we really believe is that there should be a capability for homeowners to be able to easily grant actors, including banks, access to their home energy data. So just to say, a case of how this could be applied is for EPC reform to happen, this cannot be done overnight, but initially what could happen is that they could be supplemented with in-use performance data rather than replace in the beginning. So we must balance that desire, the increased coverage with the need to ensure accuracy, and a potential solution would be this open energy approach through which data would inform on the energy efficiency of a home. So we just see the benefits of open banking, of an open energy in terms of having a data framework in which data flows automatically. We allow SMEs to report through an automated click of a button, and having these seamless processes that avoids also greenwashing for the corporates and the banks, and just creating this better access to financial data.
Okay, let's just wind up. I just want to give a few more people a chance to speak in some questions, but that's brilliant. Thank you, Elena. I'm going to open out. We've got about 5 minutes or so for some questions from the audience, and I really wanted to give you guys the opportunity to come in as well. Would anyone like to ask any questions if you raise your hands? Okay, we won't need 5 minutes. Over there, yes.
Thanks very much for a fascinating discussion. It's John Crowley from the FT's Banking Risk and Regulation. One issue that we haven't spoken about is funding, I think, and this is for you, Sheldon. In March, I think you asked the banking industry to stump up £2 million. I think they did at pretty short notice, in that you said you'd return every 6 months. I think the total figure was £10 million. Do you still need to hit that figure? And are you going to be asking the banks for more? And I guess the wider question is, if you're rolling out into other sectors, who is going to pay for that?
Sheldon, if you take that, and maybe Henk, if you want to...
Absolutely. So we were very pleased that the both banks and fintech industry responded to that call for funding. As I said earlier, what's important is that we get the right regulatory framework and we get the bill through, so that actually then our government department, Treasury, can then put some implementing legislation in, and there are options for that around mandation or not. But then that will then unlock some of where the funding comes from in terms of how the system works. I can only say what's public. We said we would return for additional monies. And the likelihood is we would return for additional money. So we haven't yet actually been out and asked for that because we're still ensuring that Henk and team are using the monies well and reporting on that to members. I mean, we haven't just taken the money and then run, so to speak. So there is. There's a board with or a council or a committee which oversees the money and ensures that it's being spent on the things that we said it would be spent on in relation to the roadmap and activities that are moving forward. And the feedback so far is that the transparency has been good and people can see where their money is being spent. The backdrop to it is that, as Henk mentioned, the CMA order could only go so far with open banking, legally and pragmatically and practically, and therefore in this sort of interim phase, whilst we're waiting for regulation, we're very keen as the FCA. I mean, I do this on a voluntary basis in one sense as opposed to a mandatory basis. I mean, we could say we're not doing it. You asked us how we support innovation. It's by doing discretionary activity like this. We're holding the ring and trying to make sure that we build out the future entity and support Henk team and Pay.UK in laying the foundations for the future of open banking, which I think is important, and I think it's important that people do invest in that, and that's why we asked for the money.
Henk, did you have anything to add?
Just quickly, I think we're not here to hit a number. I think we're doing the right thing and the right outcomes we try to achieve. If we can do it cheaper, we'll do it cheaper and more cost effective. We baselined the governance. There's a lot of governance around it. There's 20 funders in there as well. So it's not only the banks and the initial banks who funded the regulatory piece. This is a non-order regulatory piece, but it's a voluntary piece, which is amazing to get 20 parties investing in this, which is very commendable. And thank you as well again to the funders. And yes, we might come around again. But look at the work plan that also has been baselined, and it's a lot about fraud prevention as well that we are developing. It's about premium APIs, something we need to resolve in terms of the commercial sustainable models behind this too. And the lion's share is also going through, of course, the commercial VRP, which was already mentioned, because we are building. I think the scheme element can't be underrated, because that's what we need, not only standards but also schemes on top of that. And that's a scheme. We're building a brand new scheme for the UK with Pay.UK. That's quite a big operation. It has dispute management elements in it, commercial model in it. It has, I think what you would expect from it. So it's a big program, and it's amazing to see how quickly, voluntarily, actually, parties want to be engaged.
Fantastic. Gavin, very quickly, 30 seconds, because I think we have one or two more questions.
So there is a cost to developing schemes. Perseus, as we mentioned, is a scheme for the banks, ultimately as beneficiaries, but we run that as a non-profit membership model. We publish the budgets. The Institute of Directors, the Institute of Chartered Accountants are on the oversight committee for that. So we've got radical transparency, but what I'd point out is what we're doing is ultimately we're going to save a lot of money for each of the individual actors trying to create a multilateral contract. We've seen with Open Energy some of our partners saving seven-figure sums for a very small relative investment. So when we look at the macroeconomics of this, if we're unlocking billions for the economy, the cost of running a scheme, whether it's 2 million a year or 10 million or whatever the number is kind of a rounding error to get this right. And I'd link into that. There are critical elements of getting data rights cohesive across the economy, so all these schemes can be interoperable. There are also new commercial threats emergent, and there are national security considerations. So when we look at these in the round, this is, from my point of view, the most cost-effective way for the UK to develop data sharing schemes.
Thank you very much. Did we have another question? We'll take this lady here at the front. This may be our last question. We are coming to the end. So very quickly, thank you.
Charlotte Cresswell, Chair of CFIT. The opportunity for us in the UK to develop open banking into open finance, into smart data was incredible. I think everyone's been frustrated by the lack of progress, but to Gavin's point, it's very, very complex. How do we cut through the complexity of the new government? How can we expedite that? Because I think we have a huge opportunity to lead the world here. But as we've seen, you talked about Brazil, Sheldon, we've seen it with UPI in India. how do we sit there and really grasp it? Perhaps a question back to you, and how can you get this at the top of the house in your government to move it forward?
Indeed. Well, I'll see if Jeff, did you want to take it first, and then maybe I'll come in and add a few additional points. I am chairing, but I will give you a very quick response. Yeah.
I think from looking at the payment side of things, where we've seen non-card payment schemes grow quickly elsewhere in the world, be it PIX in Germany or Bizum in Spain or Blick in Poland or whatever, it's because the banks have been involved as a consortium and they see strong financial and customer experience benefits in doing so. So we need to get the banks fully on board with this so they understand the benefits. That's where the business model comes to. If I might say just one word about small businesses and energy while I'm here. So we have a carbon offset fund in Westminster. I have free money for small businesses to insulate their buildings, right? No need for capital, it is free. It's almost impossible to give the money away. Right. You have to go door to door and knock on the door and talk to them and say, hey, I have free money from the council, would you like to insulate your building? It's that hard. We need to look firstly at the customer experience and why people act the way they do, rather than think of it as a technology solution. We need to talk.
And I think from a government perspective, we've certainly showed our intent to move forward on this with the Digital Information and Smart Data Bill. I think this is going to be a collaboration between government, the regulator, and all the partners here, the tech firms, obviously you guys. It's got to be a collaboration. I'm intending to take a seat on the APPG for open banking moving forward. So this certainly will be something of great interest to me and something I'll be lobbying the appropriate ministers on to make sure that we do the right thing with this moving forward. But there's certainly an intent from government that's been made very clear through the King's speech that this is an area we will be moving forward on. We are at the end, so thank you for choosing us over the Chancellor. We are very, very honoured and appreciative. Thank you for your participation, and a massive thanks to all our panellists. It's a really exciting area. Let's keep watching what happens moving forward and enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you.